Welcome to the AA Podcast, our little corner of the web where we are not afraid to discuss tough questions like,
when did nutrition, health, movement, and stress management become alternative medicine?
Where we embrace challenges in all aspects of life to become healthier and stronger versions of ourselves.
And where food and movement are the best kinds of medicine, and cooking meals at home is a revolutionary act.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the AA Podcast. This is Ashley Olson.
And I'm Andrea Crane.
We are coming back with the second episode of our Alpha Gal series. So if you have not heard the first one, no, we're not talking about sorority sisters or a podcast or your new best friend. In fact, you don't want anything to do with Alpha Gal. So, But before we go into that, we are sharing our weekly Bible verse, and mine's coming from Hebrews 2:18, and it says, "For because he himself has suffered when tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted."
All right. Mine is from 2 Corinthians 4:8-9. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed. Did you hear that song in your head when I was reading that? Do you know that song? I'm trading my sorrow. Anyway.
Maybe.
Some of you out there
Is it Amy Grant?
I don't know. I just know we did a lot back in Colorado. That's the only time. I don't think I ever heard like the real one. But anywho. So, Ashley, we are going into episode 2 of Alpha Gal, and this is going to be, we titled this Beyond the Bite because we're not quite getting to treatment. The treatment episode will be in the next one. But I just wanted to do a really deep dive into this, and it's going to take 3 episodes. This is just the way it is. This is such a, it's such a giant, wide, deep pool of information. And I just wanted people to have like good information, because what's coming is not necessarily going to be good information. And in fact, if you help me remember, I just saw a really excitatory kind of post on Instagram about Alpha Gal that was ridiculous. And so I just want to make sure that people have good information and that we are a source for the truth about this. So there you go.
All right. Yep. We are your one-stop stop for, accurate information.
That's right. That's right.
Yes.
Of course we are.
We're basically the AccuWeather of all information health-wise.
Yes. Okay. I will take that. Of course, I don't follow AccuWeather anymore. I get all my weather from Cody, as do you.
Oh, well, that's true. Yes.
Shout out. I doubt Cody Wilson listens, but I love him. All right. So we are going to move into like the public health picture here. We're going to talk about incidence, prevalence, some epidemiological information, but first I want to do like a really brief recap. So we talked last time about alpha-gal syndrome, and we know alpha-gal itself from the last episode is a carbohydrate, and it exists on all kinds of animal products. So we're exposed to alpha-gal all the time. This is not a novel epitope or target for our immune system. We see this all the time. But alpha-gal syndrome, so when people are talking about alpha-gal in the news right now, or on your socials, they're actually talking about alpha-gal syndrome. And this is a tick-associated IgE, so it's that emergency antibody. It's an allergy. It's an anaphylactic kind of allergy in a lot of cases, not in every case, but it is mediated by that specific type of human antibody that can progress to anaphylaxis. So it is that allergy to the alpha-gal carbohydrate that causes the alpha-gal syndrome. And where we find alpha-gal, as we mentioned last time, like basically all forms of meat that are not fowl. So things like chicken and turkey do not contain alpha-gal carbohydrate. But beef, pork, lamb, venison, bison, rabbit, goat, organ meats that we're so fond of, gelatin, dairy products. Some dairy products contain alpha-gal. Also, mammal-derived medication. We're talking about like things with porcine sources, or murine. That's from mice. Porcine from pork, bovine from cow. Personal care products contain animal products as well. So, and there are some people that even react to fumes from cooking. And I don't think we made this clear in the last episode. So I wanted to really hammer this home. Like, this is such a sensitivity in certain people. And one of the reasons this is such a big deal right now is because there's so many people whose immunoinflammatory systems are just on a hair trigger. So they've got MCAS, right? They've got mast cell activation syndrome. And so their mast cells are just hanging around waiting to split open and release histamine, leukotriene, all these inflammatory compounds. So, along comes alpha-gal in the air, in fumes from cooking, and it can spur a reaction. So the hallmark of this disease, the other weird thing about it, there's a delayed reaction. And that's why sometimes it's really hard to get a diagnosis, because it can be 2 to 6 hours after your exposure, right? So it can happen in the middle of the night. If you ate, a giant hunk of steak for dinner, you could wake up in anaphylaxis. So it's a problem. Some people, let's just go through the symptoms and just know that some people have a purely GI or gastrointestinal form of this. So symptoms could potentially include abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. So all 4 of those things we associate with various forms of gastroenteritis, right? So if somebody came to see me with these 4 things, like the next day, they were like, "Oh, Andrea, I woke up, 3:00 in the morning, I'm having really bad stomach pain, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea." That's a classic presentation for gastroenteritis, like some kind of viral GI, whatever. And, okay, lots of water, rest, here's some nausea meds, and go home and wait it out. Could be alpha-gal, right? It absolutely could be alpha-gal, but that's not the first place we go. So the next set of symptoms: hives, itching, swelling, wheezing, difficulty breathing, low blood pressure. Okay, here we're getting into the anaphylactic kinds of things. We've got that vagal stimulation with low blood pressure, fainting, anaphylaxis. Okay, so it can run the gamut in between. So today we're moving away from what is this thing into the bigger picture, and some of those public health questions that you are going to start seeing show up on your socials. We're going to talk about how do we test for this? What does the positive test mean? And yeah. So anyway, we'll just talk through all of that and hopefully land the show at a decent time. So we're going to get in first to how common is this, because I think I intimated last time that this is growing in frequency. Like the reported numbers are really kind of hockey sticking in terms of a graph. And this is really troubling. But reported case numbers, and gang, I'm using CDC numbers. So it's not like I'm on some fringy website. I'm using CDC numbers from 2010 to 2018. The data was approximately 34,000 suspected alpha-gal syndrome cases in the US. Okay. So there's not many, 34,000 over the course of that 8 years. However, data between 2010 and 2022 estimates at greater than 110,000. So basically what that means is between the first window, 2010 to 2018, there were 34,000 suspected cases. Then they say, well, 2010 to 2022, now it's greater than 110,000. So what that tells us without telling us is that between 2018 and 2022, we've gone from 34,000 cases to greater than 110,000, and in that 4-year span. And we don't know exactly how much greater than 110,000 cases, except listen to this. Since 2010, the CDC then further revised the estimates, and we're sitting here in 2026, right? Just 4 years later, after the 2022 window. Since 2010, the CDC now has further revised their estimates based on new data they're getting, okay? that now as many as 450,000 people in the US might be living with alpha-gal. Okay. So this is a hockey stick if ever there was one, right? We've got exponential growth here. And so these are the numbers. These are the numbers that are like the hard and fast numbers, right? The CDC is very conservative when it comes to these kinds of things. And so this is from their data. I suspect it's much higher than 450,000. However, that's what we'll use because they say at least that many. So to talk about the testing, where's this data come from? Well, the data comes from testing. And this is why I think it's much, much higher, because that 450,000 is based on testing and what the results of that testing were. Okay. So 2013 to 2014, out of all of the tests for alpha-gal, now keep in mind, okay, this is important. Clinicians, excuse me, clinicians will only test when the clinical picture in front of them matches a possible disease. Okay. So keep in mind that there's only been one time in history that I can think of where we tested even though the clinical picture in front of us showed nothing. Can you guess when that was?
No clue. I'm guessing maybe 6 years ago.
Yeah, maybe so.
Yeah.
Between 4 and 6 years ago, in fact, exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, what we normally do and what we're back to doing, which is the same thing, is that we only test, like, every time someone comes into my office, that would be like me testing them for alpha-gal. That's ridiculous. That's absolutely a waste of resources. So knowing that clinicians only tested when the clinical picture looked like it could be, okay, there are plenty of people that don't go in and get medical care when their clinical presentation would look like alpha-gal. They're just living with it, right? So in 2013 and 2014, out of all those tested, there was a 1.8% positive rate. So out of 100 tests, 1.8 would have been positive, right? Or out of 1,000, 18 would have been positive. That's what the numbers mean. Okay. Now, in 21 and 22, that time period, the CDC says there was an explosive increase in the number of positives. It went up to 38.5% positives, okay, on all testing submitted. Imagine what it is now. We don't have that data, but imagine what it is now. So the reason why the numbers are probably underestimated, I alluded to one, and that is that people don't receive care. But alpha-gal syndrome is not currently what's called a nationally notifiable condition. There are certain disease states that if people have them, there are certain sexually transmitted infections that we have to report to our local health agency, right? Like the county health agency. There are certain reportable conditions. Now, alpha-gal syndrome is not a mandatory reportable condition. So therefore, there could be plenty of clinicians and labs that are not required to report, so they don't. And so without that reportable status, the central public health agencies that feed data to the CDC, they don't get the data because they don't have to report it. So often they don't. So cases can also be missed in a clinical setting because most healthcare providers are really unfamiliar with this condition. I mean, I got to tell you, I thought I knew something about it until I started diving in for this show. And I know so much more now. And I would have felt really poorly prepared to evaluate and treat a patient that walked in with this. I feel much better now, but most providers are really unfamiliar with it. So also why these cases can be missed is because those symptoms are delayed and they might seem unrelated to the food. Like, no, you can't possibly have an anaphylactic response to something that happened to you 6 hours ago, something that you ingested. It's unheard of. Also, some patients only have the GI form. And so again, sorry, that's viral gastroenteritis. You're a perfect presentation. Well, it might not be. It might be something else. It might be alpha-gal syndrome. Mild cases don't get attention. Patients might begin avoiding meat on their own when they put it together. Every time I eat meat, I feel so lousy. Okay, so if they put it together, they may not even get formal testing. Also, providers may not know that there is even an alpha-gal specific test that is available. But there is. There is a serum blood test where you can look for this particular antibody in a human blood sample. Reactions might be late. Well, we already went through that. Yeah, you could call these all kinds of things. There's also a category of anaphylaxis called idiopathic anaphylaxis. So like we don't know what you're reacting to, so we're just going to call it idiopathic. That could be alpha-gal. So also some patients might have these weird clusters of symptoms that are really almost impossible to reproduce. Like we can't elicit them again, and so it's very difficult to diagnose. So here is the problem. How are we counting these, right? Like the problem is that one, we've gotten sane where we're not just blanket testing everybody for these antibodies because hopefully we now know that that is ridiculous. But if you've got a patient that's symptomatic, you send the testing in, they come back with antibodies, okay? So do we count them? Is that actually disease? Can two things be true at once? Yes. Could they have viral gastroenteritis and not have alpha-gal, but also have the antibodies? Yes, that is a clinical presentation that exists. And that would actually be more common than you think. So the situation is a little more complex than just a simple test, and we're going to get into that. But or on the other hand, do we count only those who have anaphylaxis? And that doesn't seem quite right either, because other people are symptomatic and have these antibodies. So anyway, it's a muddy picture. I'm not going to say it's straightforward. What I do know is that the truth is somewhere in the middle of the sensational things that you're going to be hearing. Because on the conspiracy side, which I very proudly am a member, as are you, on the conspiracy side of things, you're going to hear some crazy stuff. And it's just not true. It's just not true. Okay. We're not going to be seeing alpha-gal under every rock, right? But on the other hand, the other side of this is, it's nothing, or that it's some, naturally born tick disease. I don't believe that either. I don't think that's true either. So the truth about incidence and prevalence is really going to be somewhere in the middle. But I do think it is gaining in prevalence enough that this is going to be a huge problem for us. Okay. So here, the next thing, any questions so far? Is this making sense?
Yeah, it's making sense. I think you kind of started touching on where my mind was going on. Well, if you're in a more tick prevalent area, so East Coast, obviously, that's where we find a lot of ticks, right? And that's
Yeah.
where a lot of people get, sorry?
Lyme.
Yes, thank you.
Lyme.
I lost the name. Lyme disease. So is it going to be those areas that are going to still be the ones that are probably most susceptible
Yep.
to this? Okay.
Well, right now, it's the Lone Star tick that is the primary vector, but it has been found in other vectors. We're going to go into that a little bit here today. But also, it is primarily relegated to the southeastern U.S., although it is growing. And so it has been found in other states, and it is marching west. It's also been found in other countries, which, we're going to talk about that too. So, I want to talk about sensitization versus diagnosis. So, and I alluded to this a minute ago. Let's say that I have 10 people in front of me. 4 of them are symptomatic for alpha-gal, but I just go ahead and test all 10. Now, it is very possible that like maybe 6 or 7 out of those 10 people have some quantifiable level of IgE antibodies to alpha-gal. So does that mean that I've got 4 symptomatic, so they're definitely in. Then I've got 2 or 3 people that are asymptomatic, but they clearly have disease because they have the antibodies, right? I mean, that's what we did 6 years ago. Okay. But that's not sane. That's not scientific. What we know is that the human body, okay, let me draw an analogy to the thyroid. Okay. If you have a provider that orders your annual labs and they're like me, I like to at least once, I like to test for thyroid antibodies. Okay. I want to know if your body is attacking your thyroid because it's so common, especially in women. I just like to cast a net for that because, everybody's got fatigue. Everybody's got dry skin. Like all of these things that we see with thyroid disease, everybody's got at least one symptom. So there is a reason to do that test. And the prevalence of thyroid disease that is driven by autoimmunity is such that it makes a lot of sense. It's a cheap test. There's no reason not to run it. Okay.
Right.
So I like to do it at least once. Now, what you'll see is that on your lab report, you may have some antibodies to your own thyroid. In fact, you probably will. But then when you come see me, I say, yep, no thyroid disease here. Everything looks good. And you say, but wait, I had antibodies to my own thyroid. But the thing is, there is a normal level of immunity that happens. Your immune system is constantly working. And so it may be throwing out some antibodies either to your own tissue, or it could be throwing out some antibodies to this alpha-gal carbohydrate. But that is a completely normal level of antibodies. That is not a disease-inducing level of antibodies. Okay. So you could potentially have a positive antibody test, but not have a positive for the disease or for the syndrome because you have no clinical correlation. You have no symptoms. Okay. Are you seeing the foolishness of 6 years ago? Yes. Okay. Sorry. I soapbox. But let me tell you, I suffered during that time. So, we've got sensitization without clinical disease. Okay. So when somebody gets on Instagram, and this is the post that I saw within the last couple of days, and this guy was on there and the sky was falling and he was talking about, I think it was probably the same kind of data that I'm getting ready to talk about with the colonoscopy population study, where everybody that had a colonoscopy in this cohort of studied people, they tested them for the alpha-gal antibody. It was there in 31% of all of the participants in that study. And I think that's where this guy was getting his data, because he was on Instagram saying, it's everywhere. A third of the people have it and they're not telling us. And just going on and on and on about how the sky was falling. Everybody has alpha-gal. 1 in 3 people have alpha-gal. It was shown on this study. That's not true. That's not true. 31% of the people, approximately 1 in 3 of the participants in that study, had elevated alpha-gal IgE. However, there was no clinical symptom correlation. So they did not have frank disease. And to say otherwise is ridiculous. Okay. So when you hear people talking about, just because, maybe it's just not out west yet, but what they're dealing with back east is a third of the people have alpha-gal and it's coming and blah, blah, blah. It's just a fear campaign. They don't understand the difference between a sensitivity, right? A sensitization between your immune cells being exposed to alpha-gal just because of the stuff you eat or what you put on your skin. Okay. You may have some antibodies, just like you have antibodies to your thyroid, but that doesn't mean you have thyroid disease. Okay. So we do not yet have a threshold number where if someone has, IgE to alpha-gal above this number, then we can say, oh, they have disease. We don't have that yet. Is it coming? Maybe that's coming. I don't know. I don't know how long these things take to roll out because I've not been around for that in my lifetime, at least. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But the reason why this matters is because you want to be careful throwing around these diagnoses, because how impactful would that be if you told someone, oh, hey, by the way, we tested you for alpha-gal antibodies and lo and behold, you have them. So you have to avoid all of the things that we talked about earlier. Can you even imagine? That would turn your life upside down. So it's a real unnecessary hardship on people to make them think that they have something when they have no clinical symptoms. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up because that's a really important thing to understand. So a more thoughtful approach, and this is how, again, this is a classic medical approach. So if you suspect that a patient in front of you, if they've got symptoms that could look like alpha-gal, then we can start exploring and we can, and people can ask themselves these questions too. So if we've got anyone in the audience or someone in your life that has had some of these symptoms on an ongoing basis and they're scratching their head, they don't know what's happening, start to ask these questions. One, was there any likely tick exposure for this person? Like, do they go outside? Are there ticks in their area? Were ticks active when they were outside? Have they been hiking and camping or hunting or, any of those activities that would put them in proximity to ticks? Do they live in a tick endemic area like the southeastern U.S. or the eastern U.S.? But also understand that they are marching west, right? There are plenty of tick areas moving west now as well. But also, did the symptoms begin after either a known or potentially suspected tick bites, right? So let's say somebody went on a big hunting trip and all their buddies got ticks. They didn't know if they got a tick or not, but all their buddies were picking them off of themselves. And then these weird symptoms started. That would be clinically significant to let your provider know. Okay. So that's potentially a piece of the puzzle. Do they have symptoms several hours after exposure to animal products? So ask yourself, if you're the one that's experiencing this, okay, I'm going to start tracking what I eat, and then I'm going to start tracking when these symptoms are popping up. And then further, you can do an elimination protocol where you stay away from all animal products and see, does that resolve things for you? Okay. Also, are the reactions reproducible? So if you suspect, then, go eat a cheeseburger and see if you've got a bellyache in 4 hours, right? Can you reproduce the symptoms? It's like taking your car to the mechanic and they say, okay, well, let me hear the noise. What do you do to make the noise, right? So you need to be able to reproduce it. Then we can test for, is that alpha-gal antibody, does it exist in your bloodstream? We can do that test and add it to the data. And then, is there a better explanation for your set of symptoms? And that's something that we ask ourselves a lot in the diagnostic process. Is there, based on what I'm thinking, if I'm thinking something kind of exotic, right? If I'm hearing zebras, instead of horses? Is there a horse that would better match the hoofbeats than a zebra, right? So
Yeah.
gastroenteritis is the horse. Alpha-gal syndrome is the zebra. And so is it possible they have gastroenteritis? Yes, it is absolutely possible. So you know what? We're going to go and see if there is reproducibility. Unless it was anaphylactic, then we don't want reproducible. We want to give them an EpiPen. But these are the kinds of questions that we need to be asking.
Okay? Perfect. Yep. I like that because, I mean, don't just immediately assume the worst.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we can kind of get on a tear on these new threats, I guess is the word I'll use, and not think logically and think clearly, right? So I also want to deliver some information about cofactors that, if alpha-gal is present, these are the things that can make the reactions more severe. So if we're trying to figure out if someone has it or not, if it worsens in the presence of these things, then that's some more data over in the column that, yeah, this could be alpha-gal syndrome. Okay.
Yeah.
So if it worsens with alcohol or NSAIDs, so this is non-steroidal drugs like ibuprofen. Okay. But here's the problem. Things like gastritis, which are fairly common. It's an inflammation of the lining of the gut. Okay. Alcohol will absolutely exacerbate gastritis, and so will NSAIDs, right? So in that instance, we would have to keep going with more questions and more data gathering. But also exercise. Exercise can exacerbate alpha-gal. Also, large, high-fat meals can make it worse. But also pancreatitis, gallbladder attacks, cholelithiasis, like all of these things can also worsen with large fatty meals. So again, it's a very, the diagnostic process is very methodical. Okay. But these are just some things to watch out for. If you have an acute illness, like you come down with something, that can often make the alpha-gal presentation worse. Sleep deprivation can make it worse. Physiological stress can make it worse. Women that are cycling during your menstrual cycle or certain phases of your menstrual cycle, you could notice that these symptoms get worse. Hormonal changes like the hell that is perimenopause can also cause some of these things to worsen. And the one I saved until last that is probably the most critical that you should strenuously avoid at all costs is additional tick bites. Because the more tick bites that you collect, remember, if you didn't listen to the first show, please go back and listen to the first show, because we really got into the transmissibility of alpha-gal and how it occurs via tick when we're exposed to alpha-gal all the time and don't get it, right? But then you get this tick bite and all of a sudden we're off to the races. So additional tick bites can definitely make things worse. Okay. All right. So now talking geography. So you mentioned Southeastern United States. Yes, and absolutely. The mid-Atlantic region, like that East Coast kind of region. Yes, absolutely. But also they've been moving into the South Central US. So some of those southern states getting into the central region, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri. Yes. And so they are just marching west. Then I think before too long, we are going to start to see it creep into like a New Mexico, potentially Nevada. We're better off in the high desert regions, but if you've got areas that are more temperate and receive more rainfall, then ticks are sure to follow. So it's, It's just kind of a matter of time. We've got weird weather patterns that are happening right now all over the place, and changes in the way that we use land can drive ticks around, right? If they're endemic to areas and then we're changing land use, we can drive them into new places. Also expanding deer populations. Deer running around can take deer ticks, and they carry plenty of disease. Also, suburban development in tick endemic areas like wooded places. Human contact with tick habitat. Now, I hesitate to bring this up because I love to see people out in the woods. I love to be out in the woods. Like, there's no better place than to be in the woods. But just be smart about it, right? This is not a call to avoid the outdoors, certainly. In fact, if there was a recipe for corralling people inside, it would be, oh, hey, let's release some tick-borne disease and keep the population inside. That would be devastating to human health. Okay? So,
sounds familiar.
I mean, we don't want to make people sick, right? At least most of us don't. So also increasing clinician awareness. So just the fact that people like me are kind of looking into this now, and the fact that I'm aware of this cluster of symptoms, so it's going to be on my radar, right? It's still on my zebra list, but it's on my radar now. And I kind of deal in a lot of zebras anyway. So it's there. Also, the availability of testing. We've got readily available testing now, and people are starting, and they will. It's probably not happened yet, but clinicians will start to become familiar with testing for this particular antibody. So, yeah, and I think we've gone through. I want to get to the alpha gal outside the United States section. Yeah. So, alpha gal. Now, they call this alpha gal like illness. Okay. Now, I couldn't really track down what they meant by like in my research. I do think it is mediated by this immune response, this antibody response to the actual alpha gal. So I don't know why we would call it alpha gal like. The only reason that I could think of was because maybe they don't have Lone Star ticks in those areas. And so, epidemiology is kind of it's a field where you can have obvious things in front of you, but they won't acknowledge it until you've researched it 10 years. So if you don't see Lone Star ticks in Europe, then it can't be alpha gal, even though all the other boxes are checked. So I suspect that's probably what's happening, but it has been reported in Europe, Australia, Asia, Africa, and Central America. Okay. So the European countries particularly are France, Germany, Spain, and United Kingdom. Okay. So that's a big swath of the globe to have it in all of these places. And when you think about it, the places where it's notably absent are the really cold, dry, arid places, right? Particularly like Western Europe heading into Russia. And you've got those really cold, dry, arid climates. And that's not particularly great for ticks. So,
yeah.
So I also want to just make the point again that even though they might say that, well, if the Lone Star tick doesn't exist in France, then what we're seeing can't be alpha gal. Well, that's just silly because there actually have been vector tick species that have been identified with carrying this alpha gal sensitization to humans. So it's not just the Lone Star tick, but it is primarily the Lone Star tick. Okay. So any questions on geography?
No.
Okay. Okay.
I think
So
we're
we're going
good
to move
there.
on. What's that?
I think we're good there.
Okay. So we're going to move on to who is at risk. A lot of this is going to be fairly obvious. Some may not be so obvious, but obviously those people that have frequent and prolonged access to outdoor exposure. Okay. So for instance, I will just say that this spring, I've never seen a tick in the place that I live. I've been here 5 years. I've never seen a tick here. But this spring, we saw lots of ticks. And that really freaked me out because I hate ticks. With the burning passion of 1,000 suns, I hate ticks. So we saw them. And I live outside, especially in the summer months. Like, I have a giant garden and I am out there constantly. And I cannot be in, big long sweatpants with duct tape on the bottom and my and like a beekeeper's hat. Like, I can't do that. So anyway, I am careful. This year I have been wearing long pants more. I've been wearing socks and shoes versus, my Tevas like I usually do. So it has changed my behavior a little. I've let my guard down a bit now that it's gotten like blisteringly hot out there, because ticks aren't as active in the terrible heat. They like more the shoulder seasons, like the spring and the fall. So that's when you want to be really careful. But obviously hunters, hikers, gardeners like me, ranchers, farmers, campers, landscapers, forestry workers, people who do generalized outdoor labor, they are at risk. But then also, even if you are pretty much an indoor dweller, if you are living near a real pretty wooded or brushy area, then you could be at risk too. But I also want to say those people who have repeat tick bites. So if you have had repeated bites from ticks, you are at higher risk. So please monitor your risk profile. Also, I want to remind you, we were horrifyingly reminded of this spring. Pets will bring ticks indoors and you will find them slow crawling on your ground. And it is a terrible sight. But your pets, your dogs, do cats bring ticks? I know nothing about cats. Surely cats get ticks, right? Don't they have tick collars for cats?
Oh yeah, they do. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah.
Yeah, they can get them. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Dogs, cats, they will bring those ticks inside.
Yeah.
If you have bunnies will probably bring them inside too. Oh yeah.
Pretty
Dogs
much
and
any.
cats. Yeah. Yeah. So practical considerations for this is just washing their bedding. You can check your pets when they come in. If you've got a real fluff monster, that's hard, right? Because those ticks, it's really important to check them right when they come in, because the ticks will burrow down and it's often hard to feel them once they've gotten to the surface of your dog's skin, right?
Disgusting when you feel them.
Oh, they're so gross, man. And in a smooth coat dog, they're much easier to feel. But if you've got like some husky looking, or like my two mutt dogs, they're really hard to feel because they've got this really thick fur and a downy undercoat, and ticks can get down in there. But it does take them a while. So they're slow moving, right? They're slow moving zombies. So we do have a fighting chance to get them. Garlic, did you just put that on there? Okay. That looks like an Ashley. Yes. Tell us about garlic, because I don't know about pets and garlic. You sent me an Instagram that I thought was interesting. So go for it.
Oh, well, I mean, just with ticks don't like garlic. They don't like that. They don't like tea tree oil either, I don't think.
Okay.
But you can feed your dog. So I feed Raven starting in the spring, usually like March, April. I'll start adding garlic, fresh cut up garlic to her food. And what the garlic does is basically gets into the bloodstream and creates like a repellent for insects. So
Okay.
fleas and ticks don't like that. So
Sweet.
it's not 100% foolproof, but neither is like a freaking tick collar either. So, so I'd rather put something
Without
that's
the
natural.
neurotoxin.
Exactly. So I'd rather have something that's a natural repellent. You could probably put some tea tree oil on their collar if they have a collar, to help repel as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
but
can I just say, I just realized there is an absolute in my life that people are probably unaware of. I would never consider giving my dog flea or tick medicine. Never.
No, absolutely
Not
not.
in a million years.
No.
I absolutely would not do that. So as I'm talking about keeping these ticks off your pets, I'm certainly not saying, oh, go out and get flea and tick collars and, avail yourself of the neurotoxins that we use for keeping fleas and ticks off of our pets. There are other ways.
It is. And if you are like just flabbergasted by that comment, happy to send some great accounts for holistic and great accounts that just follow the scary side effects of these really what are deemed from the medical or veterinary practices as harmless. They are not harmless. They do your pet so much damage. So
yeah, they're terrible. Also, it's really important. Sorry, I am eating the most insanely good strawberry right now. I so wish you lived next door because you would be eating one too. Okay, so examining the areas where they sleep. So checking their bedding, washing their bedding. That's really important. Also know that those ticks can stay on there for days, right? Like that's the problem with the exposure is that it lasts for days. So you've got some time. It's not just a quick bite and it's over. I suspect that the disease inducing process is probably carried along by the length of time of the exposure, right? Because it's often significant. But yeah, it takes an increased level of vigilance. You used to just like go outside, go for a hike, and then come back inside and not think a thing about it. But it does require some increased vigilance to check your kids, check your pets, check yourself, for any possible hitchhikers that have come along for the ride.
Exactly.
So yeah. So we talked about repeat bites. So I thought it might be good to talk about a few of the other tick-borne illnesses. So along with alpha-gal, Lone Star ticks, they're just nasty, disease-ridden. I don't know if ticks were I don't know who made ticks. I don't think God made ticks. These are just such disgusting creatures. But they carry a lot of disease. I honestly, I don't know. From the pit of hell. I think they're from the pit of hell. But diseases like southern tick associated rash illness or starry are carried by Lone Star ticks. There's something called ehrlichiosis. You've probably heard of tularemia. Now, normally I think rabbits when I think tularemia, but apparently it can be carried by Lone Star ticks as well. There's something called Heartland virus disease and something called bourbon virus disease. So I don't know. Now, I'm a Nazarene, so I don't know that I can get bourbon virus disease, but perhaps. You never know. Now, we've already talked about the fact that two things can be true at once. So again, just because someone has symptoms that might look like alpha-gal, then let's say that they have a positive test. Well, it's going to take a little more than that. So it's going to take an expanded, ongoing clinical picture, at least in my mind, before I would tell a patient or saddle them with this horrendous diagnosis. I would want some more confirmation over the course of time. If we can really nail it down and say, yeah, you know what, I'm really sorry, but it does look like you are legitimately reacting to animal products, that's when I would confirm the diagnosis. But I would collect the test result data. I would collect the clinical symptom, the symptomology, and then I would watch over the course of time as they're exposed to animal products. And, hopefully it's not.
Yeah.
Okay, so now, let's go down. I'm in segment 7, Ashley, and we're going to talk about more CDC data. So we're going to talk about the healthcare provider sort of knowledge gap that exists when it comes to alpha-gal. Now, this was in 2023, a survey administered in 2023. And I think I told you that I first read about this maybe 10, 15 years ago. First read about this really strange disease, alpha-gal. But then I didn't hear about it again until, a year or two ago. It started bubbling back up. So a 2023 CDC survey found that about 42% of surveyed healthcare providers had never even heard of alpha-gal syndrome. Okay. Not just not on their radar, but had literally never read an article about it, never heard about it. This is an unknown. Another 35% outside of that 42 of the people that had heard of it, 35% weren't confident in their ability to diagnose or manage it. So that's problematic. So if you're trying to diagnose somebody and you have no idea what to do with the diagnosis, that particular line item often will fall off your diagnostic list because you have no idea what to do with it if it does come back, right? Fewer than a third of providers who had heard of alpha-gal knew how to diagnose it correctly. That's what that means. So low provider awareness causes all kinds of problems, all kinds of delays in diagnosis, all kinds of treatment associated issues. And in terms, I want to get to treatment so bad, but next episode. So let's see, that is just a little side note on provider familiarity with this. So let's talk a little bit about how it is diagnosed. I know I've beaten this to death, but please know there are going to be people that are coming up in the next 6 to 12 months. I'm telling you, you are going to be hearing about this, and people are going to be trying to get these diagnoses. And I just want to make sure that everyone that listens to this show at least is in the right headspace about it. So here's what we need for a solid clinical diagnosis. We need a compatible history. That means you've got to have the symptoms and the symptom set that matches alpha-gal syndrome. Okay. So you got to have that clinical presentation. Then we also have to have delayed symptoms after exposure to mammalian products. Okay. It's that delayed exposure. If you're having symptoms like immediately after eating a steak or a cheeseburger or whatever, that's not indicative of alpha-gal. That's something else. Okay. So we also have to have evidence of alpha-gal sensitization. This is the blood test. This is that serum antibody blood test. And then we have to have an improvement that occurs when you avoid, and we talked about that. When you remove all the animal products, does everything improve for you? And then is there a better explanation, right? And if there's not, then we can, confidently say that that's what this probably is. All right. That may be about all I have that is new. In fact, I think it is. I do want to bring up a weird thing. You're probably going to hear about this too. But there was a bioethics paper. I think I brought this up in the last episode. Does this sound familiar? That bioethics paper where they kind of floated the idea of the morality of eating meat. Now, you and I would not agree with this, but there are people in the world that think it's immoral to eat meat. And so it was proposed that if one could foist a meat allergy upon a public, that was a moral imperative, that it would be a moral good that you would do in introducing this.
No,
So
that's not familiar.
okay. Maybe I was just thinking about it in my own ears, but there was a paper that was published, and gosh, I did not put the year on here, I don't think. Anywho, there was, oh, thank you. I hear you typing. Yeah, see if you can come up with a year on that. It was the Journal of Bioethics that said if eating meat was considered morally impermissible, then giving someone alpha-gal syndrome could theoretically be viewed as something that they called a moral bioenhancement. Now, if that is
1975?
that's probably right. So,
And then
a moral
1983.
okay. So, sorry, strawberry. So a while ago. But anyway, it's just interesting. It's just interesting that we're literally living that exact scenario right now. So anyway, something to think about.
I know.
And yeah, I think that's where I will land. And then next week, we're going to talk about treatments because all of this is pretty bleak. And I got to be honest with you, there isn't much in the way of treatment for this. Anyway, but we'll talk about it more next time. I've got to keep my mouth shut, or I'm just going to let it all out.
Well, I don't know if you're going to get to it, but I know you're working on some things in the form of treatment. So I'm pretty excited about that. I'm not sure if you're going to get to that.
Too. We will.
Okay. Well, as always, I mean, I had no contribution to this episode because this is all brand new. So I'm like a listener.
You were here.
And I was here and I was Googling things as you were talking, because I was like, well, this sounds interesting. So anyway, thank you so much for listening to the part 2 of this episode. If you're still kind of, I mean, this is so new to me. I'm still processing. So, but a lot of red flags are going off in my brain, and I don't know if the listeners are also having a lot of red flags go off, but it just is one of those things where it's like, it's not okay. Like, it's not okay. So yeah, if you are in an area that does have a lot of ticks, or you've been eyeing ticks, please definitely be careful. Take the precautions. And I was trying to think of like the ways to help with ticks, because I haven't had to deal with ticks since I lived in Kansas. So, 11 years ago. And I wasn't even aware of alpha gal back then. And I think I was pretty ignorant on the fact of the Lyme disease too. So it just wasn't on my radar. It wasn't talked about. So obviously tall socks, pants, long sleeves. And then I have heard of the duct tape thing before. So yeah, you can get black duct tape and look really cool.
And also like overheat and die of heat stroke, but at least you can die with a steak in your belly. So
which I would much rather do that than the alternative. So
I hear that. Yeah.
All right, Andrea, thank you so much for deep diving into this. I know it's taken a lot of time and brain power, but I know not only will it help our listeners, but obviously you as a clinician are probably going to see some type of episodes of these in your clinic. So it's just, you're just always up and up on everything. So it's very, very nice to have you in the corner. So
cool. Cool.
All right. Well,
Yeah,
if you
all
enjoyed
right.
this episode or any of our other episodes, like we mentioned in the last episode, how many times can I say episode? Go back and listen to the last episode. But we are trying to get 2 solid episodes out every month. I am sleep deprived. I feel I need to go to bed.
6:30 p.m. and
I
we're nearing
know
Ashley's
Andrea's
bedtime.
waking up and I am slowly dying. But we are not the same. And
No,
yeah.
we are not.
But the biggest compliment that we can receive is you sharing this episode. So if you have family I know family that live in these tick infested areas. So share it with your loved ones so that they are aware of what's going on in their area for sure. And then just know that if you are on the cusp, even Colorado is on the cusp of potentially having these ticks arrive, just being very abreast to what's going on. So,
Yeah.
and with that, we will see you on the next episode.
Bye. The content provided in the AA podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only. The podcast is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. The information and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute medical advice.